This is 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ramesh Raskar, founder of PathCheck Foundation and professor at MIT. And I'm delighted to welcome Victor Pamplona, President and CTO of PathCheck Foundation. And today we're going to talk about credentials. So Victor, we have been in this journey for a very long time about credentials. And there's a lot of confusion about this space. Kick us off with some of your opening thoughts.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you, Ramesh. So yeah, the conversation today will mostly go through what we have today in terms of credentials for proof of vaccination, proof of negative testing for COVID, and a few other options we have seen out there today. As you probably know, we have for the past year or so seeing this conversation on how to prove that you have been vaccinated for COVID in order to get access to locations and venues that might have restricted policies for folks that have not been vaccinated yet. But the field has evolved into a situation where we start to see many of the other applications that the same type of credentials could enable. And we're talking about, for instance, proof of regulatory eligibility. So, imagine in the early days of the COVID vaccination process, we did have those eligibility claims that only few people could get access to the vaccine. So why not turn those into QR codes and giving it to people so that they can, get access to their vaccines into a pharmacy? And in the same way, you can think about every other type of regulatory eligibility that you might see out there in the same format. You can give them these QR codes that are signed documents that we just provide them the proof they need to get access to places. We have seen on the past 6 months or so several different frameworks on how to do this, specifically for the vaccination event for COVID. But of course, these days they're expanding their view into all the other vaccines as well, all the other medical records that we might have and we might need to share in certain locations, in certain places. Think about, for instance, as an employer, you want to make sure your employees are healthy before coming in. You could imagine a QR code like this that provides some proof of health for even simpler situations like the flu that can affect an office or a school and damage that productivity for that team. So the field is expanding into new ways of thinking about these credentials and how to use them correctly and ethically in the field. So here is just a few, a simple list of them. And on all of these, the central point on all of this is to just let the patient or the people control their medical information in a non-custodial fashion. So what do I mean by that? You don't need to call your hospital to send the information to your pharmacy of which prescriptions you are allowed to buy. You don't need to get your doctor to send a message to your employer to with some health prescription or health information from the hospital, right? You could send everything through the patient in ways that give that patient full control of his information. So he or she decides to share this information in any way he wishes to share and control that privacy element that these days is so important for us all. And of course, the main point here for doing any verifiable credential is like I was saying, is to break this relationship between issuing and verification of the credentials. So if your doctor is giving you a health attestation, for instance, we don't necessarily want that hospital system to communicate directly with your employer in the verification side of things. Why? Because, well, they can sell the data, they can do, shady businesses with the data from patients, and we just want to try to avoid that. The idea is as simple as that. And we can control all of that information these days just by making it pass through the holder, either via an application or as a paper QR code. So for just to give you an example, if you want to try it out how this works, we do have this QR code on the screen. This is a EU COVID vaccination certificate. And if you folks can go to the Play Store with your own phones, just search for PathCheck QR Check as you can see on the screen. And if you download and install, you will see a simple button on the bottom right corner, and you can scan that credential. I'm going to run here through a demo just to let you folks know how this works. So let me just switch the presentation to my phone, and you should be able to see how this all really works. Great. So once you open the app, this is what you see. And as soon as you scan that QR code, it's the same one I was showing you on the screen, you see the information here for Roger that he has been vaccinated. And of course, the same app can be used for many of the other credentials. You might see the same for many other countries. They're all using these days the same app that we can provide. Let me go back to the presentation. And of course, this app is available worldwide today for any of you to use. And since it's open source, you can certainly download the code and recompile, regenerate the app in any way you folks want, with any branding you desire. So we should be back to our presentation. And just talking a little bit about what's out there in terms of credentials, we do have mainly this 6 formats out there. And what they do, as you can probably see from the table, is very different. So if you are considering signing for credentials and becoming an issuer on this space, either for COVID or for anything else, you would look at these standards, and you would have to choose at least one of them to ship your credentials. And you can see how the amount of features have evolved over time. They are ordered in a time base. So you can see that the smart health cards, for instance, was one of the first protocols that the specifications that came out, and they do solve these first 3 items, which is just how to transfer the information in a way that everyone else can process it later. But as we navigated forward with GVOC, ICAO, and the EU DCC, for instance, we started adding more features. One of the big ones, for instance, between these 3 models is the trust registry, which means that for the smart health card application, the trust registry just doesn't exist. Anyone with a website could issue a credential, and then it's on the role of the verifier to identify if the verifying company trusts or not specific websites on the web. So you turn that trust into a trust on the web, as opposed to, for instance, in the EU, that the entity has a central gateway that controls the access to all those keys. So only member states can actually sign for this particular standard. And this, of course, controls the quality of the QR codes out there. And it essentially means that you don't need to have a trust list. You don't need to trust any third party in order to develop for the EU. You can just trust the EU as an entity. And so this table shows what the generational growth between these specifications, from a very simple one up to what we are defending these days, that we are seeing as the Gen 2 of these credentials, which is either the World Health Organization, DGCC standard, or the Good Health Pass, which were both created after the deployment of many of these credentials, and and both of these specifications have taken into account the learnings from shipping these previous credentials out there in the market. And of course, PathCheck can process all of them and issue all of them. So we are offering all these SDKs for anyone that is entering this ecosystem to just choose a few options that you are willing to go for in terms of signing and verifying, and then ship it out as fast as you can. Oops, let me go. There you go. And just to finish the conversation, the role of the foundation is just to try to make these credentials as accessible as possible for all the participating players in this ecosystem. So we generally provide services in terms of advisory for folks that already have software development teams and maybe already have apps out there. And in that case, we come in with just a very narrow responsibility, which is just provide this deep expertise on which standards to choose and how to navigate this field in the best way the team can. As you saw from the little demos, we do provide this research and development activities for new specifications, reference implementations, and things that would just help other developers to publish their applications as best as they can. We do have as well SDKs and little libraries that can be turned into commercial agreements, so that people can use not only the open source versions but also paid versions that we provide full support for and are able to maintain over time. Especially if you're thinking about shipping as from a country perspective, you want to make sure all those libraries are fully functioning all the time. And the last one is just we also do develop the apps themselves. We do provide our own expertise in application development, in trust registry management, and issuing API services and translation services between these formats. So if you are, for instance, coming from if you have a verification service in the US, for instance, you are a US university, for instance, you need to not only verify the smart health cards, which are common in the US, but also the DIVOX, which are coming from India, for instance, or the EU DCC that are coming from all the EU countries. And we just provide that environment that you can process them all or translate between them so that your internal system can be managed with just one of these standards. And I think I'm going to stop it right here and return back to Ramesh for a few questions, and so that we can start our little conversation.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, Victor. If you can go back to that previous slide about the 4 things that PathCheck is supporting for the community. I mean, you have become the world expert in this area because you have been an expert on the WHO panel as well as the Good Health Pals panel. And you're already working with dozens of entities in helping them implementing their credentials architecture. So for you and your team that's providing these services, can you tell a little bit more about this idea of an umbrella solution that you're providing? From what I understand, the PathCheck solution is the only one that allows this transcoding between different platforms, because right now if I use the New York app, I can only validate the New York credentials and so on. So tell us a little bit more about how many of these credentials are you supporting, and what's the benefit of, say, a cruise liner or a hospitality industry or even a country to use what you're offering?
Right. So we since the beginning of the pandemic, we decided in this field to code it all. And by effectively going through the implementation of each one of these standards out there and making that source codes available for everybody else, we ended up just learning a lot on what is working, not only in the specification side of things, which is generally where people go and then they stop there, but when you try to implement and ship, you start seeing other problems that the specification did not anticipate. So we were able to just get this broader view of the space in practice down there with the folks that are actually scanning QR codes and trying to understand how the system would work better for them. And we just allow us to not only code it out and present it as a single solution that you can just call. If you are a software developer, you can call one function and you get the verified code for all of these QR codes out there. So you don't really need to worry about which QR it's coming in. We solve all that for you, and we just display the information In terms of code, of course, we display the information as best as we can from what we see in the QR code. So that is usually a huge time save for any development team out there. You don't need to worry about any cryptographic procedure, any specific choices on suite of cryptographic suites to use or how to build those payloads. This is all managed by our application. So your application developers can simply focus on the application while we focus on the rest of the system. Most of this work is being done, of course, in the open source, so you can see everything on our GitHub account. You can download, play around, and if you decide to ship a commercial application with that code base, then we just ask you to purchase the commercial license from us. So you can play around as much as we want with any personal project. Any project that is not commercial is also fine. But as soon as you put something in the market, then we ask you to come back and have a commercial license with us, so that we can be sure that that SDK that you are using will truly work at all times.
That's fascinating that we can provide more than a dozen different jurisdictions. Right. Can be used by a single entity. So just to make it more precise, if you're a cruise liner who wants to verify the credentials from people from many countries, a single app that's issued by PathCheck, on the previous slide you're showing, the single app from PathCheck can scan the credentials from all these places. And so
correct, and go through all these details, right? Because all of them in the end are different. And if you decide to redo everything we did, you will have to worry about all these little details of, who do you gonna trust on each one of the credentials, from each one of the countries, from each one of the standards. How do you propose a procedure for selective disclosure, for instance, in some of them that allow that to happen, and this will just be managed by us in the back end, and so your developers don't really need to worry about it.
Yeah, and so right now there's no app that can scan the EU credential and the Indian credential and the US credentials at the same time using a single
Correct.
app. So it's really congratulations to your team for making it happen, especially given that it involves building cryptographic libraries that can run on Android and OS, iOS, on many versions of the phone,
right.
so on, and making sure that they work robustly with a single call is pretty impressive. And again, the power of the open source community and open source development is that there's progress happening all the time. Can you clarify a little bit about what happens behind the scenes? So, I'm in Miami, the cruise liner is scanning, a paper QR code issued by, somebody coming from India or Europe or other parts of the US. What's happening behind the scenes in the app itself? Tell us a little bit more about, what happens with trust registry, what happens on the camera, what happens with somebody who has to show their passport or photo ID and so on. Just walk us through the experience.
Right. So the first thing the person will do is, just like I'm showing on the screen, they will show on their own phone some type of QR code from one of the specifications. They might show, some other information related to the QR code on the same card, but in theory, you just need the QR code. If what you were seeing from a verifier phone's perspective is just a QR code, the system is able to capture all the information it needs from the QR code itself in a fully offline manner. So as soon as you call and you point it to the QR code, we already know everything about that person that is coming in, right? Because the information is on the QR. There is no link to a server. There is no tracing of any kind happening behind the scenes. From that moment that we know all the information, what we can do is we can verify if that information has been changed since it was issued by the main authority. So if the person is coming in from India, for instance, or from the EU, the main authority is either the government of India or the country in the EU that signed for this QR code. And they provide this signature field on the QR that we can compile and verify if that entity signed for the information that we can see right now in the QR. In many ways, if the person goes in there in the QR code and tries to change things around, we can see that they have changed, and then we can invalidate the QR code, and we can not allow that person in, for instance, into a location. And then a second component is after we verify that that information is still real and coming from the place it's supposed to be, we have a what's called a trust registry, which simply lists the places that we trust as that have been doing a good job for issuing credentials in this space. So in many of these cases, they are the hospitals, the vaccination centers, or the countries in some cases. It's federally mandated, for instance, and we trust those entities to be running vaccinations and providing these QR codes correctly, right? So in that case, if a country is vaccinating, for instance, many of them will check for your ID to know if the name on your ID is the same name that you have registered to get that vaccine, so that when they create the QR code, the name is correct. And there is no way to make that, no way to socially engineer a QR code through one of these systems. So that's what's called a trust registry. We have a list of entities that have been verified by us and other entities around the globe, that they're just in a way that they're just doing a good job in terms of methods and procedures in the field to make sure the information inside the QR code is correct, and the person did get this in this case the vaccine for COVID. So those are the two things that happen in the back end, and all that information is just compacted and then send it to the developer that is working with these SDKs, and you can check which one of the cases are. The QR might be unrecognizable, for instance, might be a different QR. There's just a website, for instance. The QR might be a credential for COVID. That credential can be verifiable or not. So in some countries, for instance, Qatar doesn't provide a signature, but it's still something we can go there, ping the server, and verify. It's just not cryptographically verified, so it's a different procedure. If it is verified, then we have proof that that information has not changed, meaning the holder that is in front of you has not changed the QR code in any way, shape, or form to change the name or the age or anything, any information in there. And the last part is it's coming from a place that has been known to provide these QR codes in the correct manner, meaning only people that got the vaccine actually get the QR code and not anyone else. So these 3 or 4 data points can be used by the application to just provide a better feedback for the user, and then based on what which status it is, then the app can take actions, and in some cases let the verifier know that this is what happened in front of them.
That's great. So if I understand correctly, Miami, there's a verifier. Somebody, a guest shows up with a printed QR code or the same QR code as a bitmap image on their phone. The Miami-based verifier takes a scan of it, and behind the scene, all the magic happens in the app, which is if it's issued by California or EU, then it's an offline. So they have enough information to validate that the California entity or the European entities actually can be trusted as a good issuer. On the other hand, if it's coming from a country like Qatar, then behind the scenes, you have to do an API call to verify that it's coming from Qatar, because the country of Qatar decided to do an online verification.
Correct.
And the third scenario is when the QR code has been tampered with, and the PathCheck app can tell you on the spot that this actually does not validate what's in the QR code. Correct. And then separately, the cruise liner will have to ask your photo ID to say that the name that's on the QR code is the same as the name on the photo ID. So that's just magical. That's just fantastic. So now let's go to some things that are happening in the news. There have been several cases of leaked credentials. So and that's kind of disconcerting. So tell us a little bit about what's happening and how PathCheck solution prevents those kind of scenarios.
Yes, the press has been going crazy on those leaked credentials, not only the real ones, but also the fake leaked reports, right? So in some of these standards, for instance, the smart health cards, the standard itself does allow anyone else to create a credential. So we have seen reports where the media creates or sees a fake credential, but it's just a real credential coming from a person that is not supposed to be trusted. For instance, I can go there, build my own website, and build my own credential generator, and actually create a QR code that says that Victor has been receiving has received a vaccine from myself, and I can put it out. And if you have just a regular smart health card application, that application will verify and will say, "Oh, this is true," which is actually true. I do exist. I do provide that code, but I'm just not a trusted provider. So the media would call that a fake QR because it's not coming from a hospital or any other place. But because this API allows people to create their own codes, and solves this problem of leaked credentials or fake credentials into the trust layer, which comes after that. It's something that it is fake for most of the public discussion about this, but it's actually something that is perfectly acceptable for the specification that and the way it was proposed. So unless the application does have a strict trust registry with it, which, as you can see on the screen, for instance, the first column, they do not include by default in that specification, which means a person that is coding it, or say PathCheck, needs to provide the trust registry on top. And a couple other cases, for instance, in the EU, has been in socially engineering the vaccination sites. So if you come in with either a fake ID or a fake, you register yourself with a fake name, in some of these cases, the checks and balances in those procedures fail, and they don't check your ID, and they ship a QR code with a random name or with a name of a person that is already dead. And those cases are one-by-one cases that will happen here and there. And the way to solve for those, and the way the EU specifically decided to solve for those cases, is just to invalidate case by case. So they have what's called a revocation list, which you will download, and you will see that particular QR codes are invalid because they didn't follow the procedures in the place. So that has been happening. It's not by any means a mass disruption to this system. We have seen only 7 fake QRs in this procedure. So it's really from the almost 1.2 billion QR codes we have out there these days. Having 6 is quite a victory for this system as a whole. And of course, there is always people claiming that they created fake QRs with their own little QR codes that actually don't have any medical information. It's not verifiable in any way, shape, or form. And the media does report on those as well. So we suggest you be careful when reading these papers, because generally speaking, they actually don't mean much. It's just a type of error that either the app already goes around it and solves itself, like the trust registry, for instance, that we provide. Yes, you can go out there and you can create your own smart health card for yourself, but on our app, it's not going to work because it's going to say, this doesn't come from a hospital, so you can't really make it work. Or so all those cases do exist. They have happened. But they're not damaging the system in any way, shape, or form. The system has been foolproof and secure since the beginning. And if you think about the 1.5 billion people using these credentials right now, it's mostly coming from India, by the way, from the Devox system that has been extremely successful down there. We don't have anything to worry about in that case for sure.
So that's fascinating. So if I understand correctly, one is fake issuers who can run their own service and start issuing cards, but they're overcome by the trust registry. Mm-hmm. The second is valid issuers issuing it in the names of dead people, but that's also okay because there's a separate revocation list they publish. So in both those cases, you're saying so far the system is foolproof. But I did see online, like the EU issuing, Adolf Hitler credential. So what does it mean by Hitler credential. Is that in the second category?
That is the second category. So those credentials were invalidated by the revocation list. And of course, even if you were able to ship one of those and see that there is a person that is not supposed to exist with a credential, remember that when the verifier is verifying the QR code, one of the steps is getting your government ID and comparing the name you have on your ID with the name on the QR code. So no one can come in with the Adolf Hitler QR code and then use it, which has we have seen the media trying to present that use case as a potential troublemaker, but in the end, the procedures in the place will solve, because on all of these credentials, the verifiers are supposed to check as well your name. So they should be able to have multiple checks and balances along the way to avoid that QR code from being used, and avoid people getting access to places where they don't have to.
Yeah, I just hope Hitler doesn't have a driver's license and shows up in Miami.
Right, that would be bad.
Okay. Nevertheless, it does seem, I agree with you that the news media has made a big deal out of it. But as you explained, both these scenarios, these credentials are pretty safe. The case of fake issuers as well as issuing for a dead person. But nevertheless, in the second scene, the fact that some employee in some country in Europe was able to issue a credential in the name of Hitler has to have happened through the official channels.
Right.
What are some ways to prevent that?
So the correct way to prevent that is to request identity on the proof on the place that is providing the vaccines themselves, right? So, and I think most of the countries out there, specifically if you think about the EU, for instance, almost all of them will check IDs. In the US, is a bit of a weird space because the hospitals can decide if they want to check or not, and because we have an undocumented population, for instance, in some cases that they don't want to check because that's not their role to check for that type of status, and that creates that opening for that that person that wants to create a fake credential to come in and do it with a different name. But that being said, most of the hospitals that are providing that opening for people, they do have other checks and balances that make sure at least that the person in front of them is the same that is receiving the QR code. Even they might not ask, for instance, they might not ask your name in order to get the shot, but when you receive the QR code itself, then you have to identify yourself. So they are able to support the population that it might be undocumented in a specific location, at the same time support a QR-based system where that validation is required to happen. Otherwise, we're just going to see fake credentials everywhere. And because we haven't seen them actually showing up everywhere on these fake credentials, specifically in the US, for instance, where this is less controlled than in Europe, for instance, I think we can see that it's a great success for the deployment of these credentials.
Right. So the fake issuers is pretty easy to handle through the trust registry that PathCheck is providing,
right,
as a service, and then the fake person is just some border cases that are going to be overcome through the ID check. Right. And as you said, I think to make this solution inclusive, where you don't have to explicitly ask for your ID, PathCheck did provide right in the beginning, almost a year ago, a solution that uses an additional hash for this person, for this undocumented persons to. It's almost like your password that's right, encrypted and printed on the QR code. I understand that's not a standard yet, but if somebody comes to you to provide a solution, you could still provide that solution, although it's not a standard.
Correct, and that solution would work in most of these standards out there. The verification apps might not be ready for that type of system, but in terms of issuing, you can adapt the specification to issue with those additional QR codes, or with our idea as well of just using the person's initials on the QR, because on a verification of the QR code, you don't need to know the full name. You just need to know some reference that this is the same person that was receiving the vaccine at the location. And we are working with new specifications that will come out probably early next year to add the picture of the government-based document into the QR itself in ways that you actually, as an issuer, you don't need to ask people's names and date of birth. You don't actually need any identifiable information because you are basically taking a picture, converting that picture into facial features, and saving those facial features on the QR code in a way that when a verifier is processing that information, you also going to take a picture of the person and the facial features will be computed again, and it will be compared with the QR code. In that sense, is you create a code that is much more secure because you, by taking the picture, you are making sure that there are not even a fake government ID involved, right? So you were literally taking the facial features of the person in front of you and storing that information without any regard to, how is that person identified with the government, and then verifying the same against those facial features. And those QRs not only make it more foolproof in many different layers on this. For instance, people may type the name incorrectly, right? So it becomes a much more interesting application when you're trying to solve these edge cases. But the same QR also adds a lot of privacy, because now if you lose your QR, let's say you lose in the streets, your health information doesn't leak because your name is not there. There are some facial features, but you can't use those facial features to rebuild the face. You need to actually see me, and then in order to connect the health information that has been leaked by me losing my QR code to my face, and then to my name and where I live and so on. So the idea is you can create an even more private system in that sense. But it does require then this additional step of taking the pictures on both ways, on both sides.
That's amazing, Vitor. I think you and your team is always one step ahead and thinking about how to make these systems extremely easy to use, but also very sophisticated behind the scenes. So including a photo ID effectively into the credential. So you don't need a name or date of birth. And also from the photo ID, you cannot reconstruct the person's picture. Is going to be just magical. So I'm looking forward to it. Now, just to emphasize here, so far we're talking about once there's already a QR code, what to do with it. You just talked about how to create the QR code. Can you tell us a little bit more about the fact that PathCheck also offers, so if I'm a university or I'm an employer or a state, PathCheck also offers products online products to actually create those QR codes and run whole service. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So we do offer infrastructure in terms of just simple SDKs, so libraries that the coders will import and use in their own systems, or our own servers that will make that simple role of taking the information they have already in some form of database and converting that into the QR code. And those servers then can be connected to their system and be called just to make that little role and save the QR code within their system. And maybe from that point forward, the system has a way to sending that QR code to their holders. So we do help the issuers in that sense as well, of just so that, because most of the application developers, they do not want to go into the details of which types of cryptographic procedures do they want to run and how to keep all those little libraries updated and make sure that they can't be cracked. Right, cryptography requires mathematical proofs everywhere, so you have to have a team that has that type of expertise to evaluate these cryptographic tools to make sure the tools you're using are the correct ones and that they are not made of code that can be cracked in some other way. So we take care of all of that for them from the issuer side, from the verifier side. So if you are trying to today, if you just want to issue smart health cards, for instance, we have 3 or 4 partners that are doing this right now, and they're just importing our library, calling the method there that the library exposes, and receiving the QR back, saving that QR back on their own databases, and then from there forward, it's their own system, their own ways to communicate with the patients, the holders, the everybody out there. So it becomes extremely simple for them to just integrate and move on with everything else in the developer's life that they have to care about.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. So just to make it concrete, like if there's an employer in Texas, and in Texas there's no statewide cards, but let's say an employer in Texas with 10,000 employees, and they want to create QR codes for their employees, what would they do with PathCheck services?
Yeah, so they would just talk to us, come talk to us on Slack, for instance, or just go straight to the code online on GitHub. You can download, you can fork it, you can put up a server on your own side or use our own servers. And from that on, they just need to call the function on that server. And it's really that simple. So in terms of hours, you can have the system up and going for that location, especially if it's a private player that have full access and control over their website, that can put the public keys there and so on, and configure the systems correctly. They can get it up and going in terms of hours. So if you're out there and you're just thinking this is going to take months to develop and deploy, think again. This is, we can help you put it out in a couple hours, 2-3 hours should be enough to get this done.
That's fascinating. If you can go back to the slide on what PCF offers. So if I understand correctly, if I'm an employer in Texas, I have 10,000 employees. I have basically a spreadsheet of name, date of birth, and their vaccination status. I might have contractors, I might have visitors. I want to make sure they can go to each other's sites and fulfill the government mandate of demonstrating that they have been vaccinated. You're saying they can just come to you with the spreadsheet and you can get them up and running in less than 1 day and even issue the QR codes.
Correct. It's as simple as that. They just need to provide access to the spreadsheet, and the system will create all the QRs. Then it's just on them to see how they're gonna forward those QR codes to the loan holders. But getting the system up and going is super simple.
Yeah, let me make sure. So the HR department can bring those 10,000 records on a spreadsheet. You can issue the QR codes, by sending it to the email addresses or the phone or to the mailing address. So that's done by the HR department. Right. Then PathCheck can also provide an app that they can use at entry points, at access control points, that they can scan. Now, should they use the general PathCheck app, or should they create their own branded app? And what's the distinction between the two?
Well, they can certainly start with ours. Ours is available now. It works. It will read their QR code and will do everything they need to do in order to process those QR codes. As they move on, they might want to design their own app with their own branding, their own procedures in place. And that is also perfect. They can just fork the code that we have today that we know works and that we are using and updating in a weekly basis, and use all that knowledge in their favor and just put their branding, their ideas behind it, and ship another app that could do the same thing. So the doors are open for that to happen. But generally speaking, on the beginning, you would just use our app and get work done because it's already available. You don't need to talk about, how to deliver it on the Play stores and the app stores of the world and how to control all that system. We do all that for you.
And if they want to come to your team, this company in Texas wants to come to your team and say, can you help us create our own branded app because it might need some extra features and so on. How long would it take them to launch an app with your team?
Well, if it's just a matter of changing the branding, for instance, of the app, just a UI remake for them, it usually just takes 1 or 2 weeks for us to finish. It's more about how fast they can move on which UI features they would like to see. What's the new logo? What's the new welcome screen? What's the new point of contact? If people have any questions, they have a way to contact the issuer through the app. So we just need to set that up and file a new app on the Apple stores and Google Play stores.
Okay, that's fascinating. So for an employer who have tens of thousands of employees or even a few employees, they can come to you and start issuing QR codes in a matter of hours. Or they can, and for app, they can use something that's already online for free. Or if they want branded one, they can work with your team in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. You can get them going. What if you're a government? What if you're a state, or a small country, and you have hundreds of thousands of people who have already been vaccinated, what can you offer for them?
So there are two ways to work in that sense. So you can either import the libraries and do everything yourself. If you are concerned about governments generally have their own firewalls in place, their own networks, their own servers, and they would like to keep those things in place all together and maintain them all themselves. So if you want to do that, it's all ready to go. You just need to import and install in those servers. You can also do what we have been doing for Massachusetts, for instance, which we have our own service creating these QR codes for the state of Massachusetts without them even knowing about it, because that system is open through a few different players, and those players have the trust we need to just convert that data, from their internal databases into a QR code that can spread it out. So we have seen locations where the state is not even involved in generating the code. So long as that data is available to a server like ours, we should be able to just create the code for them. So we can engage on that as well with the public.
So in case of the government scenario, what do they need to bring? So in case of an employer, they can just bring the spreadsheet with name, date of birth, email or phone number, and vaccination status. What does the government, in case of state governments or national governments, what do they need to come to you with to be able to provide such credentials?
They need to come up in either with a way to access the database. So for instance, if a company has access to that in order to register appointments and register everybody there, the same company have access to also the medical records. So we can go through that company and download all the information and then create the QR codes. Or they can come in with just a server that is inside their infrastructure. So that server will have direct access to the database. Either way works. We just need to connect the pipes and make sure the system can read the accurate information that the state already has.
Yeah, but just to clarify, these are offline credentials. That means even if the state has hundreds of thousands of people, the access to the database is only once to convert those records into QR codes. Once the QR codes are created, you don't need access to the server. There's no real time calling back the server. So if somebody from your state goes to get on a cruise in Miami, there's no call back to the server,
Right.
and the cost of running the service is next to zero after the QR codes are issued.
Correct. You can think about in this sense as just so on the day one, for instance, you get your entire database and you create QR codes for all the people in there. And as you move on, you keep vaccinating people. You only need to share the newer ones. So if you did 20,000 people today, share those 20,000 people. We're going to create the QR codes, and we don't save any information. So from our side, it will be deleted no matter what. And once you create the QR codes, as you said, everything is offline. The information is on the QR. If they say it once, they can even delete their own database. So long as the citizen keeps their QR intact, the state should be able to not only verify that information came from the state, but also if they need to, they can rebuild the database from reading all the QRs out there. So if it gets to the extreme that the state doesn't want to keep that information within their walls because of security issues and maybe they don't want to deal with the health information within them, they can choose to, at the point of care or later on, to just create a QR code, give it to the citizen. The citizen has full responsibility of taking care of their data. And from that moment forward, deleting everything because the system doesn't require it anymore. Everything happens in an offline fashion.
Yeah, I do want to make a distinction between health records and vaccination status, because we're treating health records as something, more high stakes information. But vaccination status is a much more lightweight information, which is like vaccinated or not. And so you're saying that you can keep the health records as they are. They don't need to be touched. But as far as the vaccination status is concerned, they could just issue it and erase it. And there's nothing more the state has to do. So if I understand correctly, a state has 20,000 people, 100,000 people they want to issue, they can just come to you again with a spreadsheet. They can give the access either to the spreadsheet directly or access to the server on which the vaccination status is. Your team can issue the credentials, send them out, and after that, they could just delete that database, or they can prevent a PathCheck from actually even accessing that server system. Just one time, it's almost like creating a driver's license. But once that QR code is issued, just like a driver's license, you don't need any extra software infrastructure to go forward. And is that also a matter of days or weeks, or is it a matter of months to help a state or a country?
Oh no, this is a matter of hours as well. It's everything is these days. Everything is. Remember, all these tools have been out there for months now. So we got to a point where if you want to ship credentials right now, we only need a couple hours. And if you need to verify, we also only need a couple hours. It's very, very simple these days, using the standards available today. And by the way, it looks like we have 3 or 4 questions from Elizabeth. Not sure if you're seeing.
Good. Actually, I cannot see the questions. Let me see if I can.
So let me go through a few of them. What criteria do you use to identify verifiable QR code generators? So those things are generally available either to us or through a few partners. And essentially, we are looking for the methods and procedures upon which those QR codes and the vaccination happens, right? In the EU, for instance, they're all specified by the EU, and the member states have to follow. That is, so they take care of all that auditing procedure. In terms of the smart health cards, for instance, generally speaking, we are talking to the hospitals that are managing the systems, and most of them have a very similar type of paperwork that they get people through, and that secures that these issuers are doing the correct job. If there are smaller pharmacies, smaller hospitals, smaller players, if an employer wants to ship credentials, for instance, we reach out to that employer, and then we provide the ways we think about how to make sure that their information can be trusted, and if they pass the test, then we add them to our trust registry. But in this case, because it's a one-on-one case, we take much more. We are much more careful on how to get them in. How is the verification process different from blockchain verification? Cryptographically speaking, is almost the same, but you don't need a blockchain. I mean, people that are selling blockchain is just because they want to have this reference point on the web and save the QR information, or at least part of it, in that blockchain. And generally speaking, they want people to use that blockchain. So it's it's a way to get folks to use it, to use their technology. But there is no need for, like I said, the entire implementations for all these standards, it's all offline. If you save it on a QR, you don't need a blockchain anymore. You need a blockchain in order to, for instance, download the public key. But that public key can also be on people's websites, can also be, in the EU gateway, for instance, which is where the EU system stores them. It doesn't require the blockchain. Blockchain is just yet another tool that you can use if you decide to go to that route. It doesn't have a lot of ups or a lot of upside on using it. It's just a different way to do it.
So it's important to kind of emphasize on that point, right? Because there have been 2 main confusions in the vaccine credentials ecosystem that have really kind of slowed down the progress, to be honest. One is this unnecessary insistence on buzzwords like blockchain and others. And as you explained, you don't need blockchain at all to do that. And this is what we said about a year ago when we came out of the paper. You don't need blockchain at all. And the second confusion often is this idea that vaccine credential is some kind of a health record that has to be accessed in real time. Very much like if I, as a patient, go on my hospital's or healthcare provider's website, I log in and check my status, and shows my A1C and my blood records. And similarly, it will also show my vaccination records. And somehow the app has to, in real time, go and access that healthcare record and bring it down and show whether I'm vaccinated or not. So this whole notion that it should be a FHIR or FHIR compatible and so on. These 2 things have really confused the market of the notion of blockchain and the notion of real-time access to the FHIR health records. So I'm glad you're clarifying that those 2 things are completely unnecessary to create vaccine credentials. And if any state or any employer is thinking about creating credentials, all they need is a spreadsheet that has name, date of birth, vaccination status, and maybe a way to contact them, like email or phone number. And then you can start issuing these credentials in a matter of hours.
Right, and those options are available, right? Smart health cards does use FHIR as a main payload, and the New York system, the Excelsior Pass, does use blockchain. But everyone else do not use those things. So if you don't need to go there if you don't have to. If you specifically speaking, if you have the expertise within your team to use those systems and you already use them, then sure, why not, right? It's just because you're already doing it. But that is the only reason I would go for them. Is because your team already has the expertise with it. So if you are a hospital and you are already saving data into FHIR systems, then sure, you can do smart health cards. If you're not, then any other standard will do as well, or even better, because you don't need to learn FHIR. You don't need to learn all this blockchain or ways to access it. Like, don't underestimate that. It's a huge cost on the teams out there to just put things out using those technologies.
Yeah, and again, if you're an employer with a few thousand employees, or your state with a few 100,000 people, it's going to be much easier to deploy, right, much easier to maintain, extremely low cost, and most importantly, more tamper-proof, because using more lightweight protocols that are already being used by everybody else, and PathCheck can provide this umbrella solution. Are there more questions?
So let's see. There is a how do you update the information on the QR codes without the software infrastructure? So the QR codes are not updatable, right? So once you receive it, it represents that event that you received the first dose, second dose, or third dose. And if you have 3 doses, you get 3 QR codes, right? So you don't really change them because, once you print, you can't really change it. So what happens is that people generally either offer an expiration date. So if you're thinking about giving the first dose, and you give the expiration date so that if it is expired and people don't have the second QR code, they are not protected anymore, right? So for the first dose, I believe for Moderna, it's about 2 months or so. After that, the protection just wanes too much. And ideally, what you want is the holder coming back and getting the second QR code that gets, after 28 days or so. And then that QR code expiration date is for 6 months, right? And the third QR code, the booster, will serve maybe another year or so, because when you give it away, you already know that it's the third version. So you're already protected for that much time moving forward. So the expiration date is usually aligned with what you want to do, which dose, and how quickly you want the person back to get a new QR code. That's how you update. Which also means that the user doesn't need to do anything. The issuer will do everything for the user. So if you come in back again, you get your shot and you get a new QR code. Both things happen at the same time, generally already printed, and it's all set. The person doesn't need to do much.
Yeah, maybe the other way to think about that is first dose QR code, second dose, second QR code. The third dose, the third QR code can just eliminate the need for the first 2 QR codes.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And the user can just keep their third QR code, and it's as simple as that. So there's no notion of kind of updating it. It's just that after every shot, you're just giving them a new QR code. That's simply and again, it's offline. So once you issue them the QR code, you don't need to maintain that in the database. It's a one-time thing.
Last question here. Do you envision a commercial use for identification QR codes, such as age restrictions at AMC theaters? Yes, I think it's already happening, actually. We already seeing people using the same infrastructure we built for COVID in several other systems. And I think age-based entry point is one of them that could be key moving forward. It removes so much of the uncertainty right now of training people to look at government IDs from all the places, and parsing that birthday information, and then deciding if they can come in or not. For instance, you don't need any of that, right? You just get an app, read the QR code on somebody's ID, and the QR code will be verified, will check the age, and the app itself will tell you if the person can come in or not. So you remove most of that uncertainty that I know companies out there are a little bit nervous about. If you do have those policies, I can tell you that there is a way to build the QR code to match a specific policy, whatever it is, that is based on the same principle that we are seeing with COVID.
Yeah, that's fascinating that the same technology can be used, again, in a very lightweight manner.
Right.
Right, you could use the PathCheck app, even at, the movie theater owner can just use the PathCheck app with no cost. But again, just like in everything else, even though things are free, companies still come to PathCheck to see if we can provide a full-fledged application for which PathCheck provides them at commercial rates. And we have done that for exposure notification. Your team and Sam Zimmerman's team has deployed, kind of state level apps in Minnesota, Louisiana, Alabama, Hawaii, and so on, that are being used by millions of people already. So, and they pay PathCheck at commercial rates to develop those apps as well, which is very fascinating. There's one element, Victor, that it keeps coming up, which is, what about people who already have, the CDC issued paper credential? Can PathCheck help those people? Can they kind of use some kind of an online service through PathCheck, and then you can issue credential? What's the pipeline for that?
So we already have 2 or 3 companies converting those pictures of the CDC card into QR codes out there. I don't know if we can talk about them. I think most of them are in stealth mode yet. But the idea is that you could use our SDKs like they do to simply convert from one to another, right? So you want to make sure the CDC card is an original card, and you want to make sure the person that is coming in that show that card is also showing a government ID that says, the name on the CDC card is the same name on the government ID. When you have those pieces of information together, you can convert them into a QR code and make that QR code your ground truth from there onwards. So converting is getting really easy these days, because the CDC card does have all the information most of these standards need to generate a QR code. Then it's all about making sure the company or that is converting these codes, that they do have the procedures and methods in place to make sure the QR codes are always coming from a valid CDC card.
Yeah. So in this case, if you're hosting an event and you have, you're expecting dozens of people or even hundreds of people, what can they do to come to PathCheck? Can they just come to PathCheck, and is there an entity that PathCheck is partnering with who can convert pictures of CDC cards into a PathCheck issued credential?
We can certainly point you to those companies. We might have services ourselves moving forward, but right now we can certainly point you to those companies that would just convert using our framework, and then from there on, it's all the same standard. So it's any app that would usually read those QR codes would read these ones as well.
Okay, that's fascinating. So just to confirm, if you're a wedding organizer or event coordinator, or and you're expecting customers to come in and you want to create some simple mechanism to validate vaccine credentials, and showing them on a piece of card is going to create queues outside your venue, hundreds of people lined up, and you're checking their credentials one by one. And also, it's not creating enough confidence among your customer that everybody who comes to your venue is actually vaccinated, because the CDC cards are unfortunately easy to fake. Then PathCheck, and with the partners that you just mentioned, can do the initial processing and work with PathCheck to create the credentials. And then the venue can still use the PathCheck app to finally scan them very quickly when they show up on the site, which is just fascinating as well.
Correct.
So let's wrap up with a final thought here on some of the future directions of this thing. I mean, what's next? Is this an incentive for starting using credentials for public health? What's the role of Global Trust Registry? Just walk us through some of through the future scenarios.
Yeah, right. So as we have been discussing from the questions, Now we are at that point where these systems have been validated for COVID, and we know they work, not only in theory, but in practice. And most of the countries, counties, and states and companies are thinking about how to use the systems to do other types of credentials. So the educational community, for instance, is very interested on doing, certificates and the course degrees into a credential. They have been doing a partial work since before COVID, but COVID just sped those technologies up so much that it got to a point that for them it's a no-brainer to do it, to just put a little QR code on your university degree, and in order to verify that it's real, you don't need to call the university anymore. You can just scan it, verify it, and that's it. Your candidate is correctly verified. Another line, for instance, is for all the licensing agencies. So if you are a medical board, for instance, or if you have licenses for electricians and other services that you want to just authenticate certain users or even business registrations, now you can think about ways to just attach a QR code on the regular certificates, and anyone seeing that image not only needs to, they don't need to trust that that piece of paper anymore. They can come in with their own little phones and scan the QR code and say, you know what, the state actually verifies this business as a valid as fulfilling all the regulatory needs to keep the business up and going. So all of those conversations are happening right now, and they're all using the same standards we are seeing for COVID being applied in other spaces. So this is something that is very exciting for us, because it starts to expand way beyond healthcare, way beyond all these procedures that we have been battling to get out very quickly for the pandemic. And now it might come to a point that we will see them everywhere.
Yeah, that's fascinating that the same QR code, which was used only to store information, now also stores the encrypted signatures that this is validated. And even a low-end phone using a PathCheck software libraries can validate that on the spot, showing that cryptographically it's secure, right, and it's issued by the right entities. This is just a fascinating progress, and I hope your team and PathCheck continues to provide the solutions in open source manner, so that anybody can go and update it on their own, or come to PathCheck for a professional service, a kind of a white glove service, where you can provide end-to-end servers, the apps, and any advisory services on top of that. I mean, I know your team is very busy, either as an advisor or for creating full products with many entities, and that's keeping you very busy. But I hope this work has a significant impact as well. So thank you, Vitor, for joining us today and coming here and sharing with us all the amazing work your team is doing, especially some of the open source work, as well as some of the commercial work, commercial licensing or trust registries, and how you're maintaining them. When we speak next time, we would love to see, how maybe some case studies of how some of these partners are implementing the solutions, and even see some demos of this product. So please stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.